Welcome, my friends, to another episode of Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. Today, we are joined by Rabbi Roy Feldman, and we are going to be exploring the halachic literature and the personage of Rav Yuval Cherlow. Rabbi Feldman is the associate rabbi at New York City's Congregation Kehilath Jeshurun, I think otherwise known as KJ for short. He obtained a BA from Columbia College and his ordination and MA in Jewish philosophy from Yeshiva University, where he's currently pursuing a PhD in Jewish history, even though we'll be talking kind of about contemporary times, ironically. He also serves on the faculty of the Ramaz Upper School, and for several years, Rabbi Feldman served as the rabbi in Albany, New York, and he has been a member of the Executive Committee of the Rabbinical Council of America. And I should add, despite not being a kosher professional by trade, as far as I know, I find that he's always somehow has some kind of insider tidbits that I've been privileged to benefit from over the years. So it's a pleasure to have you on, Rabbi Feldman. And maybe we should open up before we get to the chuvos that we'll be looking at today. Maybe tell us, educate myself even. I've heard of Rav Cherlow. I know of him in very general terms, but maybe fill in some of our listeners, and tell us why you wanted to spend our 30 minutes today talking about him.
Sure. Thank you, Rabbi Kurtz, for having me on this program and for allowing me to talk about my Rebbe, Rabbi Yuval Cherlow. The answer is very simple. He's my Rosh Yeshiva. I attended the yeshiva that he heads in Israel. I still maintain a relationship with Rav Cherlow and speak with him on a semi-regular basis. Especially when I have kind of big issues to discuss. He's really a really wonderful person and a Talmid Chacham and a mensch, and has a unique perspective on things. So a brief bit about his bio. He grew up in Israel. He was born in the 50s. His parents were Olim from the United States, which you wouldn't guess based on his English, which is not excellent. He was part of that generation of real great Zionists who refused to speak English in the home. They were going to live in Israel, so he only spoke
Oh, it's
Hebrew.
like Beshita, he did not want to speak English.
That's right. I mean, obviously,
Wow.
later on in his life, he will tell you he regrets that decision now because now it'd be so useful for him to have better English.
Yeah, this happened to me. I went to more yeshivish school growing up, and I was like, I want to speak proper English. I don't care to know Yiddish. And then I was on YU Torah, and I saw there was a eulogy that Rav Pinchas Teitz gave for Moshe Feinstein. It was all Yiddish, and I was like, oh, if
Uh-huh.
only I paid more attention to the Yiddish back in the day. So,
That's right.
Imo Nochi B'tzara.
That's right. He had basically a kind of standard Dati Leumi religious Zionist education that you hear like all the Hesder Rosh Yeshiva from his generation had the same basic thing. They all went to Nativ Meir for high school. That's the kind of the standard high school that they went to. And then he went to Yeshivat Har Etzion, where he was among the early students there of Rav Lichtenstein and Rav Amital. He studied there for well over a decade, where his chavrusa, very interestingly, was Rav Re'em HaKohen, who is the Rosh Yeshiva at Otniel. They were chavrusas from the age of 14 when they started Nativ Meir, all through their decade or more in Yeshivat Har Etzion.
So if you could help me understand, and I'm sure some of our listeners, Baruch Hashem, we have a wide range of listeners as well. Just what are like the character of these yeshivas? I know you said a religious Zionist, but I imagine there's diversity even within the umbrella of religious Zionism. I just went to Shalvin for 2 years, but they always joke that it was an American yeshiva with an Israeli Hesder program. So my knowledge is very limited in this world.
Sure. Otniel now and Yeshivat Orot Shaul are both very popular Hesder yeshivas. They are probably somewhat similar in their hashkafa. They're, very open-minded. They are, they teach a broad range of philosophies and the Jewish thought. They're both, by their nature, children of Yeshivat Har Etzion. Rav Rema Cohen, who heads Otniel, himself studied at Har Etzion at Gush. Rav Cherlow and the co-Rosh Yeshiva in Orot Shaul, Rav Tamir Granot, are both alumni of Gush as well. So there's that, that's a clear influence there. And they're very popular Israeli Hesder yeshivas. They do not have much of an American program to speak of.
So I'm curious, just I guess for your own bio, how did you find yourself within that orbit?
Sure. I grew up I'm the opposite. I grew up with Israeli parents speaking Hebrew here, and I was exposed to Rav Cherlow's writings early on when he was, kind of gaining traction as a rabbi in the Israeli scene. And I wanted to have a relationship with him. I liked what I was reading, and so that's why I went to that yeshiva.
Well, I think that leads us into the next question, which is you mentioned that Rav Cherlow is very unique, even within the I guess Yeshivat Har Tzion Gush world, which for those who aren't familiar, within the I guess the Hesder world is known to be a particularly intellectual yeshiva, very pro Torah Umada. I mean, Rav Lichtenstein being the son-in-law of Rav Soloveitchik here in America. So, I mean, what did you find particularly unique about Rav Cherlow, more so than other products of the yeshiva?
Sure. Rav Cherlow is, first of all, I don't think he saw himself initially as a posek, and his focus in his writings is not on halacha, but it's on machshava. If you look at his own bookshelf is full of every sefer in Jewish thought that you can imagine, and they're all marked up with his notes. His Most of his books, if you look at he's a prolific writer. The joke in the yeshiva was that whenever he had a transatlantic flight, there'd be a new book that came out. Um,
Very
yeah,
productive. I think someone
he's
like,
very
there's like a joke, like you think like you go on an El Al flight or whenever you fly to Israel, you think you're gonna like, fit a shots in that flight, and then 2 seconds in, you're watching a movie. Um,
yeah.
but he actually
No,
he
not
actually used it.
Yeah, he really used them, and he most of his books are on hashkafa, on what he viewed as Torat Eretz Yisrael, on how Torah is renewed in the land of Israel, on Tanakh, on the thought of Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik, and because he is a real Israeli and also a product of Yeshivat Har Etzion, he has this unique blend of Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Kook's Torah, which he has an interesting Israeli perspective on Rav Soloveitchik.
Well, this is something I've noticed, and tell me if I'm wrong. I'm just, observing kind of as an outsider. I think in many of the Hesder or I think Mechina programs they call them, the study of I think what they call Machshevet Yisrael of Jewish philosophy is much more prominent than you would find in American yeshivas. It's not just like a Musar Seder you do for 20 minutes. It sounds like a more integral part of the curriculum.
Absolutely, and I think that's part of what Rav Cherlow views as Torat Eretz Yisrael, that in the land of Israel, it's interesting. The Rav, and I'm really a student of, posthumously a student of Rav Soloveitchik as well. And I'm very interested in his writing. But the Rav, famously viewed halacha as the primary source of Judaism. In halachic mind, he says, out of the sources of halacha, a philosophy will emerge, or something along those lines. But Rav Cherlow does not believe that. Rav Cherlow thinks that halacha is one, it's the legal aspect of Judaism, but there are so many other aspects that guide our thought. The Nevi'im guide our thought. And the hundreds of years of Jewish machshava guide our thought as well. And he really believes in Nevuah, in the Navi, as being a primary source of how we're supposed to look at the world and look at our lives from a Torah perspective, especially living in the land of Israel these days.
I've seen that coming out a little bit from certain parts of the religious Zionist world. The idea of almost bifurcating. Many times I think within the traditional Torah literature, we understand there to be a continuum from Tanakh to Chazal, and any Mamori Chazal are basically channeling the values that are in Tanakh in the Sifrei Nevi'im. But it's interesting. I've noticed that sometimes some writers from within his circles, I don't know if he does this, will say, well, there's certain values expressed in Mamari Chazal, and there's certain values expressed in the Sifrei Nevi'im, and we have to figure out how to reconcile them, which to me that's like a complete paradigm shift. I'm not sure if you've noticed that within your readings.
No, I think he's guided by both, and he tries to create a more a unity between the unity among all of the fields of Jewish thought.
Right. Okay, so of course, this is very good background information, and it's important to kind of know going in that he saw himself as I guess, a philosopher primarily, a thought leader.
I mean, he was a ram in a yeshiva in Chispin for like over a decade before he founded his own yeshiva. In the late 90s, in 1998, he founded Yeshivat Petach Tikva
Mhm.
with Rav David Stav, who's the head of Tzohar now, and Rav Shai Piron, who served in Knesset for a while. So the three of them were the Rosh Yeshiva when I attended the yeshiva. And that it was really founded as a as an idea to have a yeshiva in a city, kind of in the mainland of Israel, in Gush Dan, not in Jerusalem, not in the middle of nowhere, but right in the middle of a city where they could have some kind of impact and influence on Israeli society. And it's actually come much closer to Rav Cherlow's dream because now the yeshiva is in Tel Aviv,
Oh wow. So they could
where
really
they really,
that's
yeah.
fertile ground in terms of market share right there. Not that many yeshivas, I would imagine.
No, I don't think so. And they really try to integrate with Tel Aviv, with the municipality. They run some kind of, I think on Yom HaTzmaut, they run something in the Great Synagogue of Tel Aviv. So they're really trying to have to integrate with the Israeli
This
community and
reminds me, I,
integrate
I remember
the
I remember
Israeli
when I was
community.
I forgot when it was. I guess somewhere between high school and yeshiva and college. I spent the summer at Camp Morashah. So what I got confused was there's something called the Morashah Kollel and there's the Morashah Beit Midrash program. The Kollel is basically on a separate campus. The Beit Midrash program integrates in and tries to have an influence. So those are like the two different kind of approaches. Okay, so I think it's interesting to think about his unique approach, how he comes first and foremost from what you're saying as a philosopher. Now, many poskim I'm used to, they're primarily a Rosh Yeshiva, and what do you know? They get pulled into passing halacha. This is an
And
interesting
that's
character
exactly what
arc.
happened here. I mean, he's a Baal Machshava. He's a Rosh Yeshiva also, and he's a Baal Machshava. Um, and he got pulled into Paskaning Halacha because there were websites that wanted Israeli Rosh Yeshiva to answer questions on the internet, really at the very beginning of the internet, like the late 90s, early 2000s. And he was, I believe, the first Rosh Yeshiva in Israel to agree to answer shilas on the internet. Um,
Huh.
Anonymous shilas from people. So, and since I think he started in like 2000 or 2001, since then he's answered over 100, I think close to 100,000, if not more, questions on these websites on Kippah and Ynet, or they're very Moreshet. There are these, I don't know if these websites even still exist. Kippah still exists.
I think I've seen them
Moreshet
like
may not.
Shalet Arav. I've seen websites like this. The
Exactly.
archives
So he's
exist.
the original. He's the original Shalat Harav.
Yeah, this is I like this because not so many episodes ago we did an episode on Rav Pinchas Tights here in America. He is revolutionary in the sense that he was putting Torah on the radio. This is I guess is like the next generation, which is putting Torah on the internet in a Q&A forum. So this is interesting. You're saying he kind of got pulled into answering halacha in forums where other rabbanim didn't think to go or didn't want to go. And you sent me a
Well,
scan. Oh yeah.
he found it was inevitable that people are gonna ask on the internet, and he said if I don't make myself available, then they're just not going to ask the question. These are people. I mean, the people asking shilas on the internet are deliberately anonymous. They're not asking their local rabbi for a reason, and he felt that up until this became available, they just weren't asking these shilas.
It's very important. I mean, I unfortunately spend a little bit too much time on social media, but not that many years ago, I spent even too much time on social media, and there's like these groups where people post like very vapid questions that can very easily be resolved by a Sif and Shulchan Aruch or Mishnah Berurah or something, and then there's no rabbi there, so everyone's responding, you do what makes you feel good, kumbaya, and so I see the importance of having an actual bona fide rabbinic figure be able to answer these questions because if they're not, someone unqualified is going to fill the void.
That's exactly right. And so he developed. I kind of before we go into the tshuva that we're going to study more in depth, I wanted to lay out a few principles that Rav Cherlow has about halacha, which he speaks about regularly to his yeshiva about how he kind of views halacha now.
Mhm.
And one of them emerges immediately from the internet and from the existence of the internet, and that is that he does not believe there is any such thing as private psak anymore.
Hmm.
Because the minute you give somebody a private psak, it's going on some forum on the internet or on Facebook, on Instagram. So he says there's every psak halacha that a rabbi gives, you have to imagine that it's a publicly viewed psak halacha. And there are obviously many ramifications to that because number one, it has to be something that you really believe in and that you really think is true. Number two, it has to be something that if some random, right, because for every shiloh that he answered, somebody who actually asked the question, somebody else with a similar question that may not be exactly the same as Googling and finding that answer too. So it has to be something that really is broad and that anybody can take and understand and can apply to their own lives in a similar situation.
Hmm.
That's what he calls the public nature of halacha. Um, and there's another aspect to the public nature of halacha, and that is that he believes that every halacha in Israel, especially, has to be something that everybody can observe, and there will not be negative societal ramifications for that.
Uh-huh.
So I'll give you an example. An example that he likes to give, you can easily say that a police officer in Israel should try not to work on Shabbos, or a doctor in Israel should try, if you're religious, try not to work on Shabbos and have somebody else take your shift. But in reality, in Israel, almost all the police officers and almost all the doctors are Jewish.
Right.
So if you're not taking the Shabbos shift, then some other Jew is going to. And if you were to say that every Jew should not take the Shabbat shift, well, then it's going to be a free for all in the whole state of Israel every Shabbat for all the thieves and criminals.
Right, and I don't
Um,
want to get too political. This operates on an assumption of the modern state of Israel maintaining a majority Jewish population. We
Correct.
don't need to go down that route, but there's certain assumptions which I assume come from his religious Zionist outlook.
Absolutely. You want Israel to be a Jewish state. And if you want Israel to be a Jewish state, well, there has to be a way for police officers and doctors and all these people to work on Shabbat. Not a shopkeeper, but a police, the necessary things should be able to work on Shabbat somehow.
Right.
Um, another another kind of element of his halacha is a balance between formalism and the spirit of halacha. So at the end of the day, he's not a fluffy, this is the spirit of the law kind of person, but he also never wants his formalist halacha to come at the cost of what he views as the spirit of the law.
Hmm.
Um, so that's he thinks the spirit of the law is very important, and he likes to talk especially about the Ramban's three related comments on Shabbat Shabbatoni Elachem Vasita Hayashar Vatov and Kedoshim Tiyu, which
Yeah.
the Ramban himself connects in his own commentary. He says these are all related, and all three of those are about how um, the nature of law is that you can't legislate everything. There are
Hmm.
always going to be things that are not legislatable. Kedoshim to you means, you could keep kosher and not eat pork and shellfish and only properly slaughtered meat, but still eat like a glutton and be an aval birshuta Torah.
Right.
And that's just something that Torah can't legislate, but it's part of the Torah values.
Right. These are
That's
the meta halachic values that go beyond just the Sifim and Shulchan Aruch. I mean, also it's interesting. I just happen to be learning the sugya of Matzranis right now. So the idea of Asisa Yasher V'Atov actually having direct halachic ramifications about the sale of land when someone has contiguous property. It actually has halachic ramifications.
right.
But okay, so these are there more principles that he outlined?
Yeah, there are one or two more I think that are important, and one of them is prophetic halacha, which
Wow.
is that he believes that our ethics and our values come from the Nevi'im, come from Nevuah, and it's not that you should paskin based on the Nevuah, but that your psak halacha should not contradict the principles of the Nevi'im, of the prophets, and the kind of ethical principles and Mali Rov Zivcheichem, as opposed to do tzedek and mishpat and all those kinds of things. The ideas that are set forth by Yirmiyahu and Ishayahu and all of the prophets. I think, and finally, and this actually comes through in the tshuva that I think we'll look at,
Hmm.
is this idea of Oz. I don't know if it's his words or somebody else's words, but he calls it Oz HaChaim HaTiviyim, the thrust of natural life, kind of like a derech eretz kadma Torah, that there's natural life and natural human desires, and that Torah and halacha shape the way we relate to natural life and natural human desires, but it doesn't negate natural life and natural human desires. So there's a natural thrust to socialize and to be with people and to eat and to have a career and advance in our professional lives. And so halacha shapes the way we do that, but it doesn't negate it.
So that's good because that final principle to me perhaps is the most abstract one. So I think it's good that we're about to segue right into some of his chuvos. Tell us the safer, you sent me the copy, but our listeners probably don't see it, even though they could always email me for it. Tell us what safer are we looking at? And give us a breakdown of these chuvos and how you see his operating principles shine through in them.
Sure. So he has he has many books, mostly, as I said, on Machshevet Yisrael. But there's a series of collections of his online responsa that was put out called ReShut. Resh Shin Vav Taf, which is a play
Clever.
on words, Shut meaning Shelo to Chuvot, and also Reshet being the internet. Reshet is the
Ah.
network, the
I mean,
internet.
look, the title of this
So
podcast, Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. So I'm a fan of playing around with the word. He's
exactly.
more clever than I am, though.
There are four books that came out in the aughts from 2002 to 2007. They are Reshut Harabim, which focuses on questions having to do with public issues. Reshut HaYachid, private issues. Reshut HaTzibbur, which is more public issues. And then the last one is Reshut Lehachmir, which deals with questions of when is it proper to be stringent or
And that's
lenient.
and that's still a play on words over there, right?
That's right. Reshut
Oh
Lachmir,
my gosh!
permission to
What
be
wow! What a
stringent.
rabbinic sense of humor.
I know he's great. So the tshuva that we're going to look at is really one that focuses on this Oza Chaim Tivim, and it's from a young woman who is an artist, and up until now has been kind of just using it as a hobby or selling things online privately, but became part of a group that wanted to open a gallery.
Mm,
30 some odd women who were artists who wanted to open a gallery. And she and one other person are observant Jews and the others are not. And she was very nervous about Hilul Shabbat, about Shabbat desecration in the gallery.
hmm
So she asked questions like, should I insist in this group that the gallery not open on Shabbat? They might outvote me and they might say, we are going to open on Shabbat, and therefore I'm not going to participate. I think the gallery opening on Shabbat is a non-negotiable red line, she says, kavadum. Um, and she thinks they're going to agree to not opening on Shabbat because also Israeli law doesn't want these things open on Shabbat. But she's nervous that they're going to work on Shabbat by preparing the exhibitions for the next day, that they're going to have renovations in the gallery on Shabbat, and that they're going to host private workshops. Even though the gallery opening on Shabbat would be a legal problem, a private workshop would not. And also taking the gallery to fairs or markets that exist on the weekends
Right.
also would not be a legal problem. And she's nervous they're going to do that on Shabbat. So she
So,
asks Rav
so
Cherlow,
yeah.
what should I do? How strict should I be about my religious standards? What do I have to demand of them? And at what point is it okay for me to participate in this group? And at what point is it not okay for me to participate in this group?
Right. I guess this is a great question, especially coming from a 21st century vantage point, which in Western society we believe in the live and let live. I'm not saying myself, I'm saying broadly, but then in Judaism we have ideas of ochiach tochiach esamisecha, in which the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvah says the whole mitzvah rebuke is that we care for what other people are doing, and you can't just say that's between God and that person. He says that's hepech Torah, that's the antithesis of the Torah. Just turn a blind eye. And I guess the
Right.
added element here is not just the element of rebuke of Hochiach Tochiach, but also is she somehow playing a role in the Chil Shabbos by granting approval to it?
That's exactly right. That's exactly her question. And Rav Cherlow responds, first of all, by laying out three positive principles that he thinks are important here. Number one is earning a livelihood through her craft, which he thinks is a positive value. People should be able to earn a livelihood through their asiyat kapayim, through the work of their amal kapayim, through the work of their hands.
Mhm.
Second is Shabbat. Shabbat observance is a very important principle. And third is participating in public things, in public initiatives, shutfuti matzibur, participating in public with Israeli society. And I think, one of Rav Cherlow's important principles here is that it should be possible for a religious Jew to live out a normal life, right? Unlike in outside of Israel, where every Jew has to make concessions or is limited in their career aspirations. You can't You want to be an actor on Broadway in New York? Well, if you want to be Shabbat observant, that's too bad because there's a performance on Friday night and there's a Saturday matinee. There's nothing you can do about it.
Not to mention
Um,
other potential Easter wrapped up in there.
plenty of potential problems. So Rav Cherlow always views it as important for there to be opportunities for artists and actors and everything like that in Israel that conform with halacha and Jewish values, because that's part of the idea is that it's a society that is, a whole country, but it's guided by the Torah and by Jewish values.
So
Um,
is he of the opinion that, again, I don't want to get too political, but just philosophically, would he like to see the state of Israel move more toward a, I guess, theocracy might be the right term?
it's hard to tell right now because I don't think he would say that publicly because it's
Yeah.
he participates with the government on many things. Yeah, he happens to be in the last 10 years, he's the head of Sohar's ethics committee,
Mm.
and he therefore sits on a number of ethics committees in the government. He helps decide, for example, which medications are going to be covered by the national insurance companies in Israel, because he's kind of the rabbinic view of ethics in for many Israeli government things.
So he has to be
So it's
careful what he, I mean, per his philosophy, he has to be careful about what he puts out there because it'll be public and that could conflict
that's
with
right.
his other work. I understand what you're
I think
saying.
so. I
Yeah.
think so.
So
I think
how
at
does he
some
resolve
level,
this?
every religious Zionist wishes that there is right, the whole not no not a we don't I don't think it's going to be a theocracy like some of the theocracies we hear about in other countries,
Right.
but I believe that a Jewish theocracy would be a benevolent thing, and I think that every at some level, if it works, every religious Zionist believes in that at some level.
Right. And I think you're right. And I think it's a conversation, this will take us too far afield, but it's a
That's
conversation
right.
worth having because I think the kind of religious Zionism you'll see in America many times is promoting, like, look how close we are to Western society and our values are aligned with Western liberalism. Again, this will take us too far afield, but I think there's sometimes a
Yeah.
disconnect between the Zionism you'll see in Western America versus the type that's being espoused in religious Zionist circles in Israel, even though that itself is
Right.
a broad umbrella. But anyway, to our
Sure.
tshuva, because as I say, time flies when you're learning tshuvos.
That's right.
So how does he
So
resolve this?
he responds by saying, number one, you cannot profit from Shabbat sales. That's a fundamental principle.
Hmm.
So you can't profit from anything that's done on Shabbat, you personally. Number two, you should try to use your influence in the group to limit their Shabbat activities. Because at the end of the day, I want to go to the end of the tshuva first. He says, I could have told you not to participate at all with all of these chilonim, all these secular people who, are starting an artist thing, and that'll be easier. You find something else to do with your art. You don't need to do this. But I think that it's important for you. You feel it's important to participate, and we live in a reality in which some people are Torah observant and some people are not. And that's not your fault. You, young lady, did not create this reality. It's a reality that you were born into and have to deal with and have to live with. So it's not your fault that you're in this situation. And um, and you live in Israel and we want to have an influence on the world of artistry in Israel. How beautiful would it be for a religious artist to have influence on the world of art in Israel? How terrible would it be for there to be no religious influence? He
Mm,
doesn't say this line directly, but it's implied. How terrible would it be for there to be no religious influence in
right.
this series of galleries? So it's important for you to do what you can. Now there are red lines. You individually cannot profit from work done on Shabbat. You should try to use your influence to limit Shabbat desecration. So see if they'll agree to not working at all on Shabbat. If not, try to tease out the Doraita, the biblical melachot, and prevent them from, number one, doing biblical melachot and also commerce, sales, which I think he views as part of the Ramban's
Interesting.
Shabbat Shabbaton, even though technically
Yeah.
sales are not
Yeah.
biblical, but he thinks selling things on Shabbat is like a basic Shabbat thing.
Right.
Um,
Right. Closing the store
he
on
tried.
Shabbos is just like part of the character of Shabbos.
That's right. That's right. So he thinks that it's not ideal for them to only agree to the biblical melachot, but it still, might be necessary for you to participate. And then he kind of gave her a distinction between if she collectively owns the gallery and profits from things that happen on Shabbat, or if she only profits from her individual sales, then that might have a difference for her on Shabbat as well. If she, if all the sales are distributed among the owners, that could be a problem. But if she could withdraw from the Shabbat sales, that would be less problematic for her. There's a
So,
follow-up question
yeah.
also. Yeah.
Oh, I just find
Yeah.
fascinating is just the societal element. I think this is something you uniquely see from the religious Zionist world, which is this element in their analysis that they incorporate the idea of being able to participate in broader society. That's something I don't think you see so much in literature in the diaspora. I think that's something unique to religious Zionist literature. They're trying to build a country and they see participation in the broader tzibur as a value in their analysis. So I think that's particularly unique, not to him, but
I,
to his
I
broader camp.
I agree with you, and actually, I might as well invoke another tshuva that it's a three-line tshuva
Yeah.
in Reshut Lachmir, which is worthwhile because it touches just on this point. Somebody asked him, we know that there are different levels of kashrut in the Rabbanut in Israel. There's the regular Rabbanut, and there's the Mahadran, and all these things. Is it appropriate for a Ben Torah to be stringent and only eat Mahadran level kashrut? Now, you should know that
Mhm.
the Rabba, it's interesting to find out what all the different Rabbanuyot do and everything like that. So he answers that obviously there are some Rabba, if it's known that there's a Rabbanut that has a specific problem that isn't good, then you can't trust their kashrut. That's number one, which is possible. There are Rabbanuyot in Israel that have that are well known as being negligent in their supervision. But assuming it's a Rabbanut that follows their own policy, he says it's appropriate to eat in the regular Rabbanut establishments and not to demand Mahadra and Hashgacha, because the whole idea was that Rabbanut allows more places to be kosher certified, to
Mm.
close on Shabbat, to follow the basic laws of kashrut. And if all of the Bnei Torah, all the people who really keep strictly kosher, stopped eating at those places, then they would abandon that project. They would just stop. The average restaurant owner would say, "What's the point of being kosher? All the religious people don't eat here anyway, so I might as well be treif and open on Shabbos." And
Right.
he
So
says the
again,
whole
he's
point
looking
is
he's
that
looking at the tzibur. He's saying, don't just think about my personal religious self-development, but think about how Jewish society in general can develop
that's
spiritually.
right. That's exactly right. We want Israel to be as kosher as possible, and in order to do that, maybe you have to rely on a leniency here and there that the regular rabbinate relies on.
Very good. So we have about 2 minutes left. We
Sure.
covered a lot of very important principles. I think you did a great job outlining your Rebbe's philosophy, and I'm sure there's so much more to talk about that we can't cover within our session. But is there anything else you would like to leave myself and our listeners with to know about Rav Cherlow, his methodology, his just him as a person, what he does in Eretz Yisrael?
Sure. I mean, one thing that is he was one of the first ones to do this. Now it's very common for rabbis to be accessible and share their WhatsApp and emails and all that. But in 1999 and 2000, that was not as common, and his accessibility was a huge part of it. He wanted to make sure that he's available. He wakes up daily at 4 o'clock in the morning to respond to his emails and respond to all these shuvas. That I mean, when I was in the yeshiva, that was the first 2 hours of his day every day was
Wow.
responding to these questions that would come from the internet. And he would wake up early in the morning to do that so that he could come and participate in the yeshiva's activities afterwards. So he's completely, devoted to this project. He is truly a person who believes in ethical principles and believes that halacha should never conflict what we really believe Jewish ethics to be, which I think is also interesting. He can step back from the halachic process and say there are many different opinions and possible solutions to this halachic problem, and you should choose the one that is most consistent with the values of the Nevi'im and Jewish ethics,
This is
which
yeah. This
is
is an
really interesting.
Yeah, this is an excellent overview, and again, I personally learned a lot because I've heard of Rav Cherlow, certainly within like the kind of the YU religious Zionist circles, but beyond his name, I knew very little bit about him and his methodology and all that he's done. So I'm walking away with a greater appreciation, and I'm sure many of our listeners are as well. So, Rabbi Feldman, I want to thank you very much for presenting, giving us a little bit of a sample. An appreciation of your Rebbe, and Hashem should give you continued tzlach in all you're doing at KJ and beyond.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Kurtz. I appreciate it.
Thank you.